I do have a question for you all, and that is how familiar are you with Omero to begin with? Feel free to type it in chat or unmute yourself, whatever you prefer.
Not at all.
Okay.
Seems like a overview of OMERO would be good.
Yes. Okay. We can do that. Um, okay. So maybe I can start with that. Let me share my screen. And I probably do want to share the whole screen here. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good. Okay, so what I have here is an extremely bare bones Omero system. So the way Omero works is it's a platform for managing your imaging data. So the typical workflow with Omero is that you import your data into the system. So it goes through a process and then it shows up as part of the system, and then the data is actually being managed by the system itself and not by you anymore. Um, so you import your data into Omero. The data is essentially put into a server, and the server controls access to that data. It gives you the ability to visualize your data from anywhere. It gives you the ability to annotate your data, draw regions of interest. You can start analysis from here if you want to. So just as a very quick overview in this, so this is just an Omero server that is running on my computer here. And I just added two images to it. So for example, if I decide to open one of these images here, you get a nice visualization. Even in this main panel here, what you have is kind of like a tree structure here of your images. I'm going to talk about projects and data sets in a bit, but for now, you just have your images here. You have thumbnails in the middle. You have a bunch of metadata on the right. Um, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to just ask them. Feel free to unmute yourself, put them in chat. Kiya, if you think I'm forgetting anything or if you want to add anything, feel free to interrupt me at any point. This can be pretty informal. It doesn't need to be very buttoned up. Yeah, so you have a tree structure here on the left, you have thumbnails in the middle, and you have metadata here on the right. And here, for example, I opened one of these images with one of the viewers that Omero has. In this case, I was using Omero iViewer. And that gives me a new tab here in my browser where I can see each individual Z slice, for example, for my image. And for example, if I want, let me turn off interpolate because I don't know, the images look better when you're not interpolating my experience. If you want to do, for example, Z projection here, it's very easy. You just click a button, you get a Z projection for your image. You can change brightness and contrast per channel here. And this is already being applied for the whole projection. I can undo the projection if I want, if I just want individual Z slices. Is there a limitation on file type or size? File types, yes, somewhat, but the limitation is essentially so Omero is using bioformats under the hood, which means that whatever you can open in Fiji, for example, you can open in Omero. So it's a very large range of file formats that Omero has access to. File size, not really. It's in general, if you have very large data, of course, it's going to, everything is slower if you have too much data. So if I had a multi-gigabyte image and I try to create a Z projection here, it would probably take a very long time to actually calculate that. But intrinsically, no limitation on file sizes either. And then here, for example, if you want to look at the histogram per channel, you can do that. So you can adjust brightness and contrast more specifically. It's a bit blown up. But yes, you can do all of that. All the things that you would do to control brightness and contrast anywhere else, you can do that here as well. You can also add regions of interest. So let me undo this here. And for example, let's imagine you want each of these individual areas here. You can, for example, draw a little, that was a very bad circle, but you get the idea. It needs to be from the center. I always forget. So you can draw a region per, per cell or per whatever you have on your image, for example. You can save those, and those are your original data has not been changed at all. It hasn't been touched. It still exists exactly how it came out of the microscope, but now we have access to individual regions of interest that you can operate over. And for example, you can add comments for each one of them. You can, for example, show the area for each one of these regions here. So it gives you a fair amount of ability to annotate your images if you're doing things manually. You can also add tags to your images. For example, if I don't know if this was a mitosis image, you could add like a mitosis tag to it. You can add what they call key value pairs here. So essentially, it could be, I don't know, antibody and then one, I don't know, something like that, where you just have more detailed information about each of the images. You can add tables to your images. You can add attachments. Attachments can be any file. So it can be, for example, analysis results. You can add general comments. You can rate your images 1 to 5 stars. There's a lot of information you can add to your images in the system itself. And again, your original data is never touched at all. Your original data is exactly as it was. This is all being created essentially on top of your image, but not directly in the image itself. All the information you're seeing here in terms of acquisition, dimensions, pixel types, everything, this is just automatically imported by OMERO. So when I imported these images, this was all automatically detected. Even channel names, all of that was automatically detected. And if you want more metadata about the acquisition, there is a lot more in here. So essentially everything OMERO can parse from the original file format, and in this case, it's a VSI to Olympus file format. Anything OMERO can parse from the original metadata, it's going to be here. So, wavelength values, any kind of dimension description names, frame coordinates, whatever else, right? Like aperture sizes, whatever. So this is super detailed. It's an overwhelming amount of metadata, in my opinion. I never use all of that, but there's always something that can be useful for you. So this, for example, is a 60x image with this NA. You get a lot of it. And I think the cool thing about OMERO, the thing that makes it special to me is you get remote access to this. So in this case here, it's a server running on my computer, so only my computer is going to have access to it. But for example, if I go to the test server that Kiya set up for us, I don't know what credentials to use here.
It's the typical one. So
trainer one, OMERO,
exactly,
something
OMERO,
like
yeah.
that. Yeah. Okay. I don't think there's is there data? Did you put data in there?
There is data. It's going slowly because
It's
of
very
the
slow today because of the Cloudflare. Yes.
issues. Yeah.
In this case here, there's a bunch of copies of the same data, but in this case, yes. So all the data here is already pre-annotated to some degree. There are some extra annotations that come from how we create the server itself. And this, with this address here, you can access this from anywhere you are. So you don't need to be on a VPN necessarily. If the server is accessible from anywhere, you can just see your data from anywhere. You can annotate from anywhere. You can add key value pairs and all the stuff, draw your regions of interest, everything from anywhere you are. So wherever you have access to your server, you have access to your data directly. The other cool thing about OMERO is that it gives you a unified interface for accessing all your data if you're writing Python. And in this case here, this is what we're going to be doing for most of this workshop, is writing Python code that interacts with the server. And then you don't need to know that this image is a TIFF and this other image here is a VSI. You don't need to know all of that. All you need to know is what's the image ID in Omero, and you're going to get all the information from your image, purely from the ID. Okay, that was probably the quickest introduction to Omero I've ever done in my life. Are there any questions? Anything I forgot to add, Kiya? I am not seeing any questions, but I'll give people a minute. Okay, so Omero has a very nice Python library to interact with the server itself. So I can look for Omero Py here. I wanted to find the PyPI, but sure. This is super well developed. It's super detailed. It does everything you might want to do with an Omero server. It's pretty complicated to use. Not very welcoming for people who are starting out doing things in Omero or people who are starting out doing things in Python. So over the years, in my previous job at the Jackson Laboratory, I just realized we did not introduce ourselves, Kai. So yes, my name is Erick. I am working as data management coordinator at EMBL, the European Molecular Biology Laboratory. Yeah, as of about 3 months ago, but I used to work with Kiya at
Jax. So I'm Kiya Govek. I work at the Jackson Laboratory as a systems analyst in research IT. I admin to Omero instances and help users with using them.
Yes, so before Kiya was the admin for the Omero servers, I was the admin for the Omero servers. So over the years, we wrote a bunch of small functions to make our lives easier. So essentially, instead of every single time having to remember how I do this one thing using Omero Py, we started writing those things down. And eventually that turned into, why do I not have this in my history? Anyway, I missed an A. That turned into Easy Omero. As you can see, it is a module with convenience functions for writing Python code that interacts with Omero. So this is not me reinventing the wheel. This is not me saying that Omero Py is a bad library or anything like that. This is just me saying it could be easier. There are easier ways to do the things that we want to do when we're talking to Omero from Python. And here is how we could do them in a easier way. As of 4 hours ago, I did port the documentation to this thing here. So if you ever have any doubt on how to use any specific function for EasyOmero, they're all documented in excruciating detail here. So this is what we're going to be using for this workshop. And if you have it set up, that's great. If you do not have it set up, that's also totally fine. I'm going to be doing things live here.
If you were trying to set it up and have questions or issues, feel free to put them in chat and I'll try to troubleshoot as Erick is going. If you do not have an Omero server, some people have joined since I mentioned this. I do have a demo one running. So if you have a Python environment with Jupyter and want to set that up with EasyOmero and just need access to an Omero, let me know in chat and I'll give you a temporary login for that.
Yes. Okay, so before we actually start going into detail, I just want to give you kind of like a very simple example on how to get an image from Omero using Omero Py and using EasyOmero, so you can compare and contrast and see why EasyOmero exists. Just kind of like a small teaser of the things we're going to be doing and how it's pretty easy to do if you use all the scaffolding we built over the years with EasyOmero. In addition to the two things I'm going to be showing in this introduction here, OMERO has a command line interface too that can do a lot of stuff, like almost everything you can do. So because it's like similar in terms of functionality to the things we're going to be doing, I didn't want to show an extra thing. So we're going to stick to Python, but if you want to do most of the things you can do on the command line as well. So the first thing I did here is I created a config.py file here. This file contains essentially the sensitive info about accessing your OMERO server. So um, it's going to be your username, your password, the actual address to your OMERO web interface and the OMERO server, which port it's using. In this case here, I'm using, as I said, I'm running this OMERO server locally in my computer. No one else is going to have access to it, so I don't mind you seeing, that my username is root and my password is OMERO because they're not going to be able to do anything with it. In general, when I'm writing code that does things, I have this as a local file in my GitHub repository, for example, but I do not commit it. I make sure that that's added to git ignore, so that's never committed to the repository itself, so that no one ever has access to the secret stuff. If you are, yeah, I mean, as I said, like I have no reason not to show you in this case here. If you are using the Docker Compose following the setup instructions that I had on the workshop, you can use this config file exactly as it is here. You don't need to change anything. It's just going to work. But if you are using, for example, Kiya's OMERO server, then you would need to change the address for the server here. If you're using, a different OMERO you already have access to in your institution, you would need to change it accordingly as well. You might need to change username and password too. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is from that config, I'm just going to import all those variables. OMERO user, OMERO pass, OMERO host, OMERO port, OMERO web was the name of the last one? Yes. Okay. So yes, now we have access to all these variables instead of having to, copy all of these to each individual notebook here. If you have an OMERO server that you're going to be using for this instead of a local one, or if you just have spun up a local one using Docker Compose from the setup instructions, you will need to add some data to it before you can do anything. Obviously, you cannot retrieve an image that doesn't exist. So, there are multiple ways to add your data to OMERO. There is a command line interface. There is a program called OMERO Insight that is a nice graphical interface for importing data into OMERO. Whatever way you prefer to add data to OMERO is totally fine. And then what I'm going to do is here from my OMERO server, I'm going to choose one of the images that I'm going to be using for the workshop. In this case here, I am going to choose image ID 1. So if you have an OMERO server and you have a bunch of images already, you can just pick one, note the image ID, and this is what we're going to be using. So in my case here, for example, I'm going to call image ID to be 1 because I'm using image ID 1 here. So that means that whenever I try to access an image, I'm going to be trying to access this ID here. I also need to import ezomero because we're going to be using that. And I'm also going to import matplotlib pyplot SPLT just so I can show the images essentially.
Replace the V with a B.
Yes, thank you. There we go. Yes, so at this point here, if you try to import ezomero and it failed, for example, you need to make sure that the Python you are using for your notebook is a Python that has access to ezomero. So you need to have your virtual environments configured correctly and so on. I'm not going to go into detail on that because this is not a virtual environment workshop that will be a whole 2 hours. So I'm just going to move forward here. In my case here, as you can see, I was able to import ezomero, which means that my Python has access to it, and we're all good. I'm just going to add some magic here so that matplotlib shows things the right way. Instead of like opening a new window, it's just going to show it here. So don't worry about this. You don't need to know anything about this here. Okay, so the way ezomero works is you create a connection to the server, and that's going to be a Python variable. So essentially, it's a connection object that you have in Python. And then every time you try to do anything with OMERO, you just give whatever function you're trying to use that connection object, and it's just going to use that connection to talk to the server. So the first thing we need to do is create that connection object. So the way that works is I'm just going to call it con here in this case. ezomero obviously has a function to create that connection. And here's where documentation can come in handy. If I go here and I search for connect, I can have a look at the things I need for my connection. So in this case, for example, it's user and then password, then group, host, port, secure. So first thing we need is user. So we imported that from config, so I can just use OMERO user. Then it's password, and then it is group. Group is optional. If you don't give it a group, it's just going to use whatever default group that user is in. So I'm just going to give it an empty string because it's just going to use the default one. And then it is host, port, and secure. So I'm going to use the variables I have there as well. OMERO port, and then I'm going to say secure equals true. And I can run this and nothing broke, nothing screamed at me, so that's good. We have a connection. If anything went wrong in this connection process, you would get an error here. But in this case, everything just worked.
As a note, if something goes wrong, my first check is switching secure to either true or false and seeing if that works better.
Yes. Okay, so we have a connection to the server. This is, unless you wait like 10 hours to do anything with that connection, you can just keep using it. So we are going to use that connection object with another ezomero function here. Let me search for get image. So we are going to use this function here. This function gets an OMERO image object along with pixels. So essentially what we're going to do is we are going to pass this connection object. We are going to give it an image ID, which as you can see is one of the parameters you need here. And we are going to add one extra optional parameter here to return an array that has this dimension ordering here. So if you don't do that, it will return an array with this order of dimensions here. So it's time and then Z, then Y, then X, and C, which is the default for a scikit image. But in this case, we want something a little bit more nicely ordered. So I'm going to go back here. And one thing I forgot to mention here is that this function returns two things. This function returns an image, and an image is an OMERO object. So it's something that, for example, if you are using OMERO you can use directly. And it also returns the pixels. The pixels are, if you have used a NumPy array, it's going to return something that looks like a NumPy array. And if you ask, for example, just for a specific chunk of your image, then that array would just be a subregion of the image. So we are going to get back an image and the pixels, and I'm going to do ezomero get image. I give it the connection object, I give it the image ID, and I'm going to say xyzct equals true. And just as a sanity check here, I'm going to look at what the shape is for the pixels that we get back. There we go. So the NumPy array we got back is 1645 by 1682 by 11 by 2 by 1. So this is X, Y, Z, C, T. So if we go back to our OMERO server, we'll see that this image here is this by 11 Z sections by 2 channels by 1 time point. So we got the right thing. So now if I want to show this image, I can just use matplotlib for that. And in this case here, I'm just going to pick one plane for this image, because obviously this image has 11 Z slices and it has 2 channels. So there's actually 22 different planes on this image. So in this case here, I'm just going to pick one. So I'm going to pick Z slice 7, channel 0, and then time point 0 because there is only one. So if I do this, I forgot the brackets. There we go. We have a thing that looks like an image. This is only one of the channels for Z slice 7 on this image, but we have the whole array. So if we want to do any analysis in Python or anything, we have it all there in this pix variable here. So if I change here from 7 to 3, it's going to show me a different Z slice. And if I change this from 0 to 1, it's going to show me the other channel for that same slice. This is the most basic thing probably you can do in ezomero is just, I want an image. And in this case here, if you want an image, it's one line, right? You create your connection, and then after that, you just ask for an image and you give it an image ID and you get all the pixels for that image. Okay, I'm going to close my connection to the server because we are going to do the same thing now using the original OMERO library. So essentially, if you need to do everything you might possibly want to do talking to OMERO, you need to use the original OMERO library, and you're going to see that it's a little bit more work to do. So in this case, I need from that OMERO library, I need the sub package gateway, and I need to import Blitz gateway. And Blitz gateway happens to be what this thing here is. So con is actually a Blitz gateway. So we are going to create one here, Blitz gateway. And you can immediately see why this is not as welcoming for beginners, because you need to know that a thing called Blitz gateway exists, right? And if you don't go looking for that in the documentation, or you get an example from someone where it's just evident to you that this is something you need, you would never think that the thing you need to create a connection to the OMERO server is something called the Blitz gateway. So I'm going to create a return value here, and I'm going to actually do the connection. And just to make sure it actually worked, I'm going to print it. True. Okay, we did get a connection. Good. But yes, you know, a bit more complicated to create a connection than the connect function we had here. This still kind of okay. Okay, so now I need my image. And to get an image, I need to run the getObject method here. And I need to tell it that I want an image of this ID. And if I do that and I look at what I get back, oh, this is nice. I didn't know they did that now. You actually get a thumbnail and some information. This is much nicer than you would normally get in OMERO, but you're
Can you
still...
print out the type of image?
Yes. Yes, so this is what you got back. You did not get an array with your pixels or anything like that. This is the thing you got back. This is way nicer than it used to be, but it's still, you know, you don't have your data immediately. You have a view of your data. So if you actually want the pixels, you need to, from your image, get primary pixels. And here I can print pixels.
Space between image and get primary pixels.
Thank you. So what you get back is a pixels wrapper. It's still not your actual thing. So if I want a plane, I can then from pixels get a plane. And let's say 700. And then I can actually show it. And you get your plane. So, there is just like 2 or 3 extra steps that you need to do just to do a very basic thing that you didn't need to do if you're using ezomero. With ezomero, you just get image, you get your pixels, and you can do stuff with it immediately. If you're using OMERO you need to get an object. Then from that object, you need to get the primary pixels. From those primary pixels, you need to get a plane. And then you can actually do things with it. Only at this point here, you actually get your pixel values. So from here, now you actually have an array. While if I go back here, I don't have the connection anymore. It's fine. Immediately from here, if I printed pix is already the array, right? So there is at least 2 extra steps you need to go through here to be able to get to your actual data that you wouldn't need with ezomero. This view, though, this is new to me. Looks pretty nice. Okay, so this is what I wanted as an introduction. Actually, one thing I didn't mention here is that in this case here, as you can see, Pix has all the data for your image, right? So it has all 22 planes. You get all of them in one command. Here, if you want your 22 planes, you need to loop over this, essentially. You need to create a for loop that is going to get each individual plane, which is not ideal. All right. Questions, comments, anything anyone wants me to know? Anything that you're curious about? Max projection image. Not directly. You need to calculate your max projection. OMERO is not going to give you one immediately. So for example, here, when I open the image and I ask for a max projection, you will see that it takes a little bit, right? Because it is actually calculating the max projection when you click the button. So it's not something you can, OMERO doesn't store a max projection, right? So it needs to be calculated when you actually have the data. All right, can I also ask for metadata? Sorta. There are kinds of metadata that we're going to see that you can get directly from ezomero. So for example, these key value pairs here, for example, you can get directly from ezomero. You can get tags with ezomero. I don't remember if we have get comments or anything like that, but there are certain things you can get directly. All the rest, your image object that you get with your get image here is still a valid object where you can use OMERO to do all the rest you are not able to do with ezomero. So it's not like it's impossible. It's just that you then need to go to the quote unquote real API to actually do work. But a few things, the things that people want the most often are here in ezomero, and it's normally the OMERO specific metadata. That's most often what people want when they are talking to an OMERO server is the specific metadata related to OMERO. All right. Any other questions, thoughts, anything else? All right. Yes.
Sorry for jumping in.
Yep.
Actually, I would like to have one more question for OMERO in general, if you don't mind.
Yes.
And I'm sorry if you've mentioned this at the beginning, I didn't manage to join on time. So I was wondering about the security of OMERO. Like you said that you can access the server also, like if it's allowed, you can also access it like from anywhere from the internet. Are there any security measures or anything that I could tell our IT guys to allow me to install this, or how is it?
Yes.
How does it work?
There is a lot of institutions that are really mindful of security use OMERO, right? I'm not a security expert myself, but there are lots of pharma companies that use OMERO, lots of universities use OMERO, and I don't think we've ever had at Jax in my previous job, I don't think we've ever had IT say anything about like, oh, we found a vulnerability in OMERO or anything like that. It's very robust software. It's been around for a very long time, and it's pretty well secured as far as I know. We do special things when it comes to things that are publicly accessible. Well, but when I say we, I mean Kiya. I don't work there anymore. Kiya, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, in just a second, I'm putting in chat. ImageSC is a great forum that a lot of different Omero admins at different institutes um, kind of hang out and are very quick about responding. So if you post there and are just like, hey, Omero admins, what kind of security measures do you take for your instances? You'll get a bunch of responses from different people at different institutions. So for our active Omero, we run it inside the VPN, and our institute uses kind of a worldwide VPN solution, such that I can connect to it from anywhere, and then I am essentially inside the Jax VPN and can only access Omero that way. And then Omero logins are controlled by our LDAP system, um, and so authentication is handled by that, but it's a little bit more locked down that way. For our public Omero, there's a way of connecting Omero Web to a read-only Omero server so that the public users who are connecting and reading the data don't have actually any power to edit the system itself. So those are two examples, but post on ImageSC, you'll get a lot more.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, so I'm going to create a new. Oh, cool. I'm going to create a new notebook here, and now we're going to do some stuff with ezomero, like how do we actually do things? What are the things we can do? Again, I want to emphasize that this is only using the actual Omero Python API under the hood. There is very little of ezomero that is new features or anything like that. It's essentially how do we expose a thing to people that's easier to use. OmeroPy itself uses a thing called ICE to talk to the server. You don't need to know details about that, but just so you know that it's not using like a regular web interface to talk to the server. It's using a specific system. Okay, so the beginning for this is going to be similar to the previous one, so I'm just going to copy paste here. I'm just importing the same variables I had there from my config file, importing matplotlib to be able to show images, importing ezomero. So all my imports done, and then I'm just going to create a connection again, same code. Okay, I have a connection. There are a few other ways to use this function to connect to the server. So if you don't want to, for example, pass your password directly in your Python code here, which I probably wouldn't want to anyway, you can do things like create a hidden file that has your credentials. You can have environment variables with your credentials. You can just, if you omit this, for example, it's just going to ask you for your password when you're running the thing. So you don't actually need to have your password stored anywhere. If you don't have it anywhere, it's just going to ask you for it. Yes, so in addition to just giving them as variables here, there are a couple other ways you can store these things here. Yes, so I was mentioning here that there's this thing called Blitz Gateway and so on and so forth. The thing you get here, this connection object here, is exactly the same type as this one here. So it's fully compatible with just using OMERO if you want to use OMERO. So if all you want to use ezomero for is to create a connection object, that's totally valid. You can just use it to create a connection and then just use OMERO directly. It just works. Okay, so a quick example I'm going to give here, for example, is looking at users and groups and administrator rights and so on and so forth. So in this case here, for example, I'm just going to get user. So that should give me which user created this connection here. And in this case here, it doesn't look particularly useful because it just says experimenter wrapper ID equals 0. But I can do something slightly nicer here, for example, and do this. Users have individual IDs in OMERO. So if I look at the admin interface here, you will see that the root user, which is the one I'm using, has ID 0. So if I opened a connection with this guest account, it would have an ID 1, and so on and so forth. If you admin a large server like Kiya does, you end up knowing some of the user IDs for a bunch of people, which is it's a fun thing. So I can check if my current user is an administrator, for example. In this case here, I'm just doing con.isAdmin. And as you can see, I'm not using ezomero in any of this. These are things that just exist on these objects that I created here. So the connection object has an isAdmin thing. The user object I got using getUser has a getID thing, and so on and so forth. So I'm not doing anything ezomero specific just yet. You could also, for example, do get groups member of. And in this case here, there's going to be nothing if I put this in a for loop. This is just a generator object. If you are deep into Python, you know about these. But in this case here, I'm only a member of this group called system. ID and name are flipped. I just realized that. This should be name, this should be ID. There we go. That makes more sense. So if I look at my admin interface again, and I go to groups, so in this case, the user I'm using is in this system group with ID 0. And this is the only group this user is a member of. Yeah, so when I'm doing things with OMERO, I like having the place where I'm writing code in one tab and the actual server up on another tab so I can see what's happening. And I find that very helpful. So, just recommendation, if you're ever writing code for OMERO, just have the server up just so you can see what's happening. Okay. The first thing I want to do is create some things. So we will create a little bit of hierarchy. When I was giving the OMERO intro at the very beginning, I mentioned very briefly projects and datasets. OMERO doesn't do folder structures the same way your computer does. So your computer, you can just have folders inside folders inside folders as many times as you want. OMERO only gives you 2 levels for these. It has projects, which are the blue folders, and it has datasets, which are the green folders. In general, you're going to have images inside datasets inside projects. The kind of like rule of thumb that we have is that most people will probably want to have very few projects with a lot of datasets. There are a few specific things that you want your images to have to be grouped into a single data set. I'm not going to go into too much detail in that, but it's essentially, every imaging session you have on the microscope should probably be its own data set. Okay, so I'm going to create some stuff in the server from my Python code here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new project. So I'm going to use ezomero for that. And the function is called post project. And the reason why it's called post project and not create project is slightly technical. We wanted to align the names of the functions here with well-known patterns for doing things with servers. But yeah, every post just means create, essentially. My new cool project. This is the project description. So if I go to my documentation here again, and I search for post project, you will see that the parameters for that are a connection, a project name, and an optional description. And the thing you get back is the ID of the new project. So the ID of the new project is going into proj ID, and here I'm passing the connection, the name of the project, and the project description. So I'm gonna do that. And if I go back to my server here and I refresh, my new cool project is right there with the right description and everything. So again, single line of code does the thing you want. That's always the goal with ezomero. Okay, so I have a new project, and now I want a new data set. So I'm going to do a similar thing here. ezomero post data set, as you could have guessed, and I'm going to go back to the documentation here, and I'm going to look for post data set. So that requires the connection, the dataset name. So connection, dataset name, whole new dataset. What else? An optional project ID, an optional description. This here is a complicated thing. I'm not going to go into this workshop, but essentially it allows you to do things that would be complicated to do with OMERO if you were a member of multiple groups, which is not going to be the case in this workshop. Okay, so project ID description. The project ID allows me to create this data set directly inside an existing project. So I don't need to create a data set and then find a way to connect it or anything like that. It's just created inside the project. And you know what? I'm feeling generous. And I'm going to give it a description too. Okay, so if I go back here, my new cool project now has a little 1 next to it. If I open it, my cool new data set is in there with the description as we expected it to be. Okay, so now, okay, before I go forward, just any questions, anything, any comments? Please feel free to interrupt me anytime anything is not clear or it's confusing or it's too fast. Any
I have a
interruptions are
question,
welcome.
actually.
Yes.
Is there an ezomero function for moving an existing data set into a project?
I don't think so. That's where you go into the wilderness of OMERO and you create a project data set
Project
link.
data set link.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Awesome.
Yes. It gets ugly very fast, but I don't think we have anything for that, you know? Pull requests, always welcome. If you want to write something like that, feel free to submit it. Okay, so now I want to create a new image in my new data set here. And there's 2 ways to create images in OMERO. You can either import an image file that already exists, which is what I did for these images here. As you can see by the name, these are just VSI files that came out of a microscope. But you can also just create full new images. So for example, if you're doing some kind of analysis and you get an array with the segmentations for your images, and you want to save that as an image, that is also possible. So in this case here, we are going to do that. So I'm going to do some NumPy magic here. I'm going to create an array with pixels, and I'm just going to create a completely random array here. And it's going to be 256 by 256. No, it's going to be up to 256 values. So 8-bit image, and I'm going to give it a size. Let's say 200 by 200. You know what? Let's go bigger. 1,000 by 1,000 by 20 by 3 by I don't know, 5. That's a pretty large one. And actually, I do need to say that the type of data I have in there is, how does this go again? uint8, okay. Okay, so this whole line here is just, I am creating an image that is 1,000 by 1,000 by 20 Z slices by 3 channels by 5 time points. It is an 8-bit image, and this corresponds to that. Okay, let's just look at what
Are you making a 2 gigabyte
random.
image? Am I doing this math wrong?
That's a megabyte. That is 20, 60, 300 megabytes.
300. Okay, I did do my math wrong.
Size is not defined. Oh, yes, of course, because this is equal. Okay. That's an array. You know, that's what it looks like. It's a lot of numbers. Okay, now I want to turn this array into an OMERO image. So I am going to, as you might have guessed, post image. And we can go back to our documentation and search for post image and see what it wants from us. It wants the connection, it wants the actual image as an array, it wants an image name, an optional description, a dataset ID that's also optional. If you are copying that, so if you want to create a derived image from an image that already exists and you want to copy all the metadata from that source image, then you can do that as well. A channel list, of dimension order. There's a lot of stuff you can give it to this function here. So I'm going to pass the connection, my pixels I just created, a name for the image, a dataset ID. What did I call it? I shouldn't have printed this thing. It's too big. Data ID. Okay.
You can compress the output by clicking on the left side of it.
Yeah, I know. This should be good enough. You get a warning, which is a warning that was basically because this is something that goes against the way we import data into OMERO at JAX. And again, I'm using we when I mean Kiya. But you don't need to worry about this warning. So if I refresh my server here, there's now an image in there. It's called test image as I asked for. And if you look at the metadata here, it is 1,000 by 1,000 by 20 Z sections, 5 time points, 3 channels, and the pixel type is uint8. So I can look at it if I want, and it looks like a lot of random pixels. And because it is 3 channels, OMERO assumes that is an RGB image, which is why it's colored like that. You can see RGB here. Cool, we have an image. Also cool, we get the ID of the new image back. So if we are creating an image and we immediately want to do stuff with that image, we already have the image ID in this variable here, and we can use it for whatever we want next. Yes, something I did not mention is that if I go to my thing here, the function assumes that the order of the dimensions is X, Y, Z, C, T, which is the order I created them with the pixels thing. If you needed the dimensions to be in a different order, you could also do that. And this is something that you could give here as dimension order. So it's essentially you just give it a string that has these 5 letters in some order, and it's going to do the right thing. Okay, we have an image. We have from scratch created a project, a data set, and an image just by writing a little bit of Python. Now we can add a few annotations to this image. So we are going to use a function called postMapAnnotation to create one of these key value pairs here. So the name of these annotations for OMERO is map annotations because they map a key and a value. So I'm going to search here for post map annotations. Annotation, just the one? Yeah. Okay. So this requires the connection as always, an object type, an object ID, a key value dictionary, and the namespace. This gets a bit more complicated in terms of the OMERO data model, but there's nothing too complex here. I'm mainly going to copy and paste these because it's a little bit of typing. Okay, so the way Python would represent a thing that has a key and a value is a dictionary. A dictionary is a Python data structure that has a key and a value, a key and a value, and so on. This uses these curly brackets here, and that's how it's represented. So I'm going to create this dictionary here, and I'm going to create a new map annotation with that. Post map annotation, just the one. I need the connection object. I am going to send this to a project. Let's have a look at what the project ID we created was. It was 1, but we don't even need to know that because we have that stored in a variable. And I'm going to pass this key value dictionary here. And actually, I do need a namespace. I'm just gonna call it cool namespace. I think that's all I need. Okay, let's see if my project now has a key value pair. It does. It is in the cool namespace. It was added by me, and it has 2 keys and 2 values. So test key corresponds to test value. Is this a project? Corresponds to yes, just like we wrote it here. Cool. I can do the same thing for an image now. So I'm just going to copy the dictionary because this is kind of tedious to type. But my image map annotation ID is going to be ezomero post map annotation. And in this case, I get a connection and I want to send it to an image. And I have my image ID. I have my image key value dictionary. And I have another cool namespace. Can I have spaces in the namespace?
We'll find out.
About to find out. All right, so let's check the image. Yeah, you can. There it is. And you get it. Test key and test value. Is this a project? No, just like we wrote here. And OMERO now also very helpfully shows you the key value pairs that are in the project that contains that image.
That was added in like the last year, and I'm super excited.
This is
about
super
that.
new. Yeah, you get to see the annotations on parent things as well, which is very cool. Right. And when you're done, close your connection. Okay, so this covers the basic creation stuff that you can do in ezomero. So good time for questions, comments, anything, while I stand up and turn on the lights because it's getting dark in here. Okay.
I think we lost a good few people to the enrich your Python workflow with the imaging server kit.
Yes, that's fair. That's understandable.
Overlaps.
Yes. And yeah, there was also a OMERO workshop happening roughly at the same time. Yeah. Okay. I like this a lot. I think it's just this. No, it's not this size. I don't know why the Python logo is really big. Okay. Now we can look at the things we created. We can, write code that retrieves things from an OMERO server. And of course, we started this by doing that by retrieving an image, but we can do more than that. Okay, so we are going to start where we ended the introduction part of this. So I'm going to copy paste the things we did on the first part. And then we had image ID equals 1. And I got the image and I printed the shape and I plotted it. And in this case here, I was plotting the first slide. I can do something like that, and it's going to show something a little bit more interesting. Okay. The one thing that I kind of papered over very quickly is that you need to know in advance what your image ID is. And of course, if you have a huge amount of projects, a huge amount of data sets, a huge amount of images, you don't want to be kind of like combing through everything in here to go and find exactly the image you are interested in. You want to be able to write code to retrieve the image ID you want. So let's start from the beginning. So if you just want to know which projects you have, you can just use print projects and give it a connection object. In this case, I only have the one project, which is my new code project, which is right here.
Which I'm going to say, as someone who also uses the Python API without ezomero, that's probably the thing that this abstracts the most and is easiest compared to the original Python API.
Yes, there are some things that you would think are pretty straightforward, but are not. Okay, so I know which projects I have. If I had a bunch of projects, they would all show up here. So the one thing I'm going to start with is actually choosing a project. As I said, in general, we're going to have few projects and a lot of data sets and a lot of images. So picking a project is not a huge lift. In general, you know which project you want to be working on. So in my case here, it is ID number 1. So I'm just going to do this. Okay, so you can list all the data sets you have inside a project. And I think this is the one place we don't have good easy OMERO code yet. You actually do need to go into OMEROPy to do this. So you do need to do something like connection.get object, or maybe I have code for that now. I don't remember if we added a, we should check. We do have get data set IDs now. Good. Can you tell I wrote this thing a while ago? So this returns a list of dataset IDs. So I can do ts IDs is ezomero get dataset IDs and just give it a project ID. And this should work, right? I don't need anything else. Yeah, I think that's it. And in this case, of course, it's a list that only has one data set because there is only one data set in that project, and it's dataset ID number 1. And now that you have a dataset ID, you can do the same for your images. So I can do, for example, ID list is ezomero get image IDs, connection object, dataset IDs. In this case here is 0 because there's only one of them, but this is just a regular list. So you can just pick whatever and it just works. And ID list, again, this only has one image in there and it's image ID number 3. But just by writing a little bit of code, we were able to kind of like go through the whole tree of all possible things and figure out exactly where your image is and, what the ID you actually want to work on is. And now, of course, you can also look at what are the things that exist in this image, for example. So I can do something like annotation IDs is ezomero get map annotation IDs. And for this, it's slightly more complicated. So if I go back to my documentation here, map annotation IDs. So you need a connection, an object type, and an object ID. The reason why the map annotation stuff is slightly more complicated is that you can have a map annotation attached to essentially anything, OMERO. So if I just told it 1 or 3, you wouldn't know if that's a project ID, a dataset ID, an image ID, and so on. So you also need to say what kind of object it is. So I'm going to take the first element of our ID list here. Again, there's only one, but it could be many. And I think that's all I need. And again, there's only going to be one because we only have one annotation in this image. And if I hover over here, you'll see that the image ID is 3, the annotation ID is also 3, which is why we got a 3 here. And now if you want to know what's in that specific map annotation, you can go one further and actually get the map annotation. It gets your dictionary back. So I can do annotation is ezomero get map annotation connection and annotation ID is 0. I think that's all I need, right? Yeah, just the ID. And if I print it, you'll see that it returns as a dictionary. The same way I put it in essentially at the very beginning. This is what I get out at the end. I can also print that map annotation if you just want to know what's in there and you don't need to actually retrieve the dictionary. Do I still have this? We'll see. Yeah, okay. That still exists and it prints in a slightly nicer way than the dictionary here. The dictionary is much better to do things with. So if you're writing Python code and you need to do things with this return value here, this is much nicer. If you just want to see the contents, this looks nicer. Okay, what else? When we were looking at where was that? When we were looking at the objects we had here at the beginning, like user.getID and so on and so forth, there are also functions in ezomero to just get the ID from a name for a user or a group. So, so for example, I can do group ID ezomero get group ID, and as usual, connection object. And if you remember, there's a group called system with ID 0. So if I print this, it gives me a 0, as it should. And similarly, there's a user, I get user ID. User ID, connection, and let's try root because that's the user we are using right now. That's also ID 0. I'm just going to double check that's all actually the case. Yes, it is. Okay, one thing I'm not going to show here because we don't have multiple groups, but there is also ezomero code for switching between groups. So in the case of a large OMERO server where you are a member of multiple groups because you're collaborating between different groups or something like that, there is very good ezomero code that tells you, I want to switch from working from my main group to the group in this collaboration with people. It switches over your connection object to use all the permissions you have in this different group, which is very neat and not easy to do. Okay, closing my connection here and pausing again to give people a chance to ask questions if they have questions or make comments if they have comments. and the chance for me to drink some water. I love the big Python. Okay, so probably the most recent big change in ezomero, and by most recent I mean like it's probably like 2 years old at this point, was working with regions of interest, or ROIs if you do imaging stuff in any capacity. People just say ROIs. Using the default OMERO API for ROIs is really, really hard and really annoying. So we have done a lot of work in ezomero to make that easier for people. I have an image here with 3 ROIs already. You might remember that I drew some stuff. I'm gonna draw a few more things here. I'm gonna put a couple points. I'm gonna put a rectangle. What else? A weird arrow? Sure.
Polygon?
Polygon? You got it. There we go. Yeah, save those. Okay, so we're gonna start where we always start, which is this code here. Just importing all the stuff I need and creating a connection. In this case here, I'm using image ID 1 for this. It now has 8 ROIs. So I'm going to start by saying my image ID is 1. Now I'm going to get a list of all the ROI IDs from that image. Get ROI IDs, connection, image ID. There we go. They have very creative ROI IDs that go from 1 to 8. Here's where the OMERO data model gets slightly annoying again. ROIs and shapes are different things. So a single region of interest can have multiple shapes. In this case here, all our regions of interest have only one shape. No, stop. I didn't want to make another polygon. That's fine. Stop. More polygons. It's fine. Yes, actually, let me rerun this thing here because now we have 2 more. Yes, so ROIs and shapes are different. ROIs can have multiple shapes. In this case here, it's a one-to-one relationship because we drew them like that, but they can be one-to-many. But because those things are different, you actually need to get your shape IDs for a given ROI. So ezomero get shape IDs, connection, and let's take the first element of that list there. And you might guess this is going to be 1. And then we can actually get the shape from that. So get shape, connection, shape IDs. In this case, of course, there is only one shape. So I'm going to do that. Make print shape. And you see that our first ROI is an ellipse with X and Y in those places. Radius for X is this, radius for Y is that. It's at Z equals 5, and so on and so forth. It's filled with this color, stroke is this color, stroke width is this. There's a lot of information for each individual ROI there. So the thing we get back is an ellipse object. So if I do the type for my shape here, it's an ezomero ellipse object. And this is, we eventually decided to implement our own objects here because they would have easier ways to interact with compared to the OMERO Pi objects. And of course, you can do the other way around. So you can create one of these, import ellipse. And in this case here, I'm just going to copy paste a definition of an ellipse that I had ready already. Okay, so now I have my shape here. that is an ellipse with those things. And if I want to create a new region of interest from that, I can do a new ROI ID, ezomero post ROI connection object, image ID. And you always need to pass a list of shapes because, again, you can have multiple shapes per ROI. This is my shape. And voila, if I go back here and I refresh this page, there are now 11 ROIs, and there's a new ellipse that I don't see anywhere. I think it might be up here somewhere. Oh yeah, it's a tiny ellipse up there. Okay. It is in the coordinates we specified with the size we specified, and it is called my new ellipse, the same way we defined here. Yes, so that's ROIs with ezomero. There isn't much more to that, I don't think. And you should always close your connection at the end. Okay, so I did say it was going to be like an hour 15 to an hour 30, so we are right on time. I left plenty of time for people to have questions. You know, people deserted us to go to other workshops, which is totally fine. So we have plenty of time if any of you have any questions. Otherwise, this is it.
I'll jump in with a note, which is that this is also a great method for taking ROIs from other pipelines, for example, like Napari Cell Profiler, and putting them back into OMERO so that OMERO can act as like the central storage location for that kind of information. There's a few limitations around like what kinds of ROIs can be stored in OMERO. For example, like this ellipse can't be like tilted, is something I discovered. But yeah, things from ROIs from like QPath, Napari, Cell Profiler can go back into OMERO. And that's a great workflow that we use in multiple styles at JAX.
Cool. Any final thoughts? Anything else from anyone? Well, special thanks to the two of you who soldiered on and stayed to the end. I hope it's been helpful for some people out there. And I'm always happy to talk about my favorite child.
And good luck with your presentation later, Brian, which I think is tomorrow, actually. But
yep. All right. That's it. I will see you somewhere at some point in the future. Bye-bye.